Auschwitz, Dachau, Treblinka. These names echo across history as monuments to human cruelty. But what if I told you there was another camp, one survivors called the most terrifying of them all? A camp where thousands perished in silence, where children wasted away in wooden barracks, their cries replaced by a metronome that still ticks today, and yet almost no one outside the Baltics has ever heard its name. This is the forgotten story of a quiet town with a dark secret. Salaspils today is an ordinary Latvian town. Apartment buildings line quiet streets. Families stroll through the famous botanical garden. The train from Riga hums past pine forests and birch groves. Nothing here suggests that beneath the soil, the ground remembers screams. The railway line was built in 1861, bringing life and trade to this once rural area. For decades, Salaspils was simply a place of farmers, families, and fields. Even during World War I, when battles raged across Latvia, this town eventually returned to peace. But that peace was only an illusion. Its location, close to Riga, yet hidden in forest, would make Salaspils the perfect place for the Nazis to conceal one of the darkest projects of World War II. Operation Barbarossa. On June 22, 1941, Hitler unleashed the largest invasion in history. Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German soldiers surged into Soviet territory. Latvia, under Soviet control for just 1 year, became a battlefield overnight. Within days, the Germans entered Riga. The red flags of Moscow were torn down, replaced with swastikas. Army Group North occupied the entire country in less than a month, but conquest was only step one. Behind the front lines marched the Einsatzgruppen, special killing units tasked not with battle, but with extermination. Their orders were chillingly clear: eliminate Jews, communists, and undesirable populations. The Holocaust by bullets in Western Europe. Deportations to camps came later, but in Latvia, the Holocaust began immediately. Not with gas chambers, not with deportation trains, but with bullets. The forests outside towns became killing fields. Men, women, and children were marched at gunpoint, forced to dig their own graves, and shot in mass pits. The Nazis relied heavily on local collaborators. Among the most infamous, the Arnies Commando, led by Victor Arnies. This unit of Latvian volunteers helped round up Jews, burn synagogues, and carry out shootings. Another figure, the once celebrated pilot Herbert Cookers, became known as the Butcher of Latvia for his role in these atrocities. By the end of 1941, tens of thousands of Latvian Jews had been executed, their communities erased in weeks. Insert survivor testimony. Frida Mikkelsen paraphrased: "We were marched into the forest. People carried babies, some still in their nightclothes. The shooting never stopped. The snow turned red." The Rumbula massacre, the most infamous massacre, came in Rumbula forest, just outside Riga, on November 30th and December 8, 1941. More than 25,000 Jews were marched from the ghetto to the woods. Under SS leader Friedrich Jeckelin, the killings were organized with industrial precision. Victims walked 10 kilometers in freezing cold. Anyone who stumbled was shot on the roadside. At the pits, they were stripped of clothing and valuables, forced to lie face down on the bodies of those already shot, and executed in layers. The Jeckelin system, he called it. By sunset, thousands of corpses filled the ground. Entire families vanished in 2 days. Rumbula was not only one of the largest two-day massacres of the Holocaust, it was also a rehearsal for what came next, the birth of Salaspils after Rumbula. The Nazis wanted more than forests filled with graves. They needed a permanent site, a place for prisoners, forced labor, and quiet death away from Riga's eyes. SS officer Rudolf Langer, who had overseen the Rumbula shootings, chose Salaspils. Construction began in late 1941, but who built this camp? Not German engineers. It was built by its first victims: Jewish deportees from Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia, along with captured Soviet POs, armed with shovels, bare hands, and starvation diets. They cut timber, dug foundations, and erected barracks in the frozen earth. Winter 1941-42 was brutal. Temperatures plunged below -20 degrees Celsius. Prisoners slept outdoors or in half-finished huts. Many froze where they lay. Survivors recalled waking to find the person beside them stiff and lifeless. Before Salaspils officially opened, hundreds had already died. Life inside the camp Salaspils was labeled a police prison and labor education camp. The name suggested discipline. Reality was hell. Prisoners worked 10 to 12 hours a day, cutting peat from wetlands, hauling timber, and digging ditches. They had almost no tools, no gloves, and no shoes. Food was watery soup and a scrap of bread. Punishment was swift and merciless. Beatings with rifle butts, hours in freezing isolation cells, or transferred to the punishment barracks, where survival was nearly impossible. At night, prisoners crammed into cold wooden bunks, bodies pressed together against the frost. Lice and disease spread unchecked. Each morning, corpses were carried out silently. Salaspils killed, not with gas chambers, but with work, hunger, and time. The children of Salaspils. Perhaps the darkest chapter of Salaspils was its children. Around 1,100 children passed through the camp. Many were taken from partisan families in Latvia and Belarus. Some were infants stolen from their mothers. They were herded into barracks with no medical care. Typhus, measles, dysentery spread rapidly. Hunger hollowed their faces. Their cries filled the night. In the mornings, silence. The death toll between 1941 and 1944, about 12,000 prisoners passed through Salaspils. At least 2,000 to 3,000 died. Compared to Auschwitz or Treblinka, these numbers seem small, but the horror was intimate. Death here was not swift, it was slow erosion, as hunger, disease, and despair consumed body and spirit. For survivors, Salaspils was remembered not as a factory of death, but as a place of endless waiting for death. The end of the camp. By 1944, the Red Army approached Latvia. The Germans dismantled Salaspils, burned documents, and forced remaining prisoners on death marches or into other camps. When Soviet troops arrived that autumn, they found little but empty barracks and shallow graves. Yet even in ruins, the land whispered of what had happened. Ironically, the Soviets soon reused the camp to house German POS. The cycle of suffering continued on the same ground. Memory and myth. In 1967, the Soviets built the Salaspils Memorial Ensemble. Towering concrete statues stand in the clearing. The mother, the humiliated, the unbroken, solidarity, silent giants watching over the dead. A metronome ticks endlessly, symbolizing the heartbeat of those lost, especially the children. But Soviet memory was selective. They inflated the death toll to over 100,000. Transforming Salaspils into a propaganda tool. Atrocities against Jews were downplayed. Stories of blood draining were spread to shock audiences. The truth became blurred between silence, exaggeration, and politics. A forgotten story. After Latvia regained independence in 1991, the nation began piecing together a more honest memory of Salaspils. Scholars now estimate a smaller, but no less tragic toll. Thousands dead, including hundreds of children. Yet outside Latvia, few people know this story. Why? Because Salaspils lacked the gas chambers of Auschwitz. Because its numbers were overshadowed by massacres like Rumbula. Because its story was twisted by Soviet propaganda, then forgotten in the West. But for those who visit, the silence is deafening. The ticking metronome does not let you leave unchanged. The ticking heartbeat. Salaspils may not be a name in our textbooks, but to the children who starved, to the prisoners who froze in the barracks, to the families who never returned, it was the end of the world. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of Salaspils is not only what happened here, but that we almost forgot it ever did. In memory of the victims of Salaspils 1941 to 1944. Have you heard of Salaspils before, and why do you think stories like this remain hidden in history's shadows? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten stories of the past.